The black waitress who melts the heart of a cold, dangerous mafia boss. Delilah's back hit the brick wall so hard that air shot out of her lungs. Her ex-boyfriend's fingers closed around her throat, squeezing, lifting her slightly off the ground. Her black waitress uniform was ripped at the shoulder, her bun half fallen, curls sticking to her face as she fought for breath. Dawn crept into the narrow alley behind Valentino's, the light catching the thin layer of ice on the ground. The dumpsters beside her reeked, her hands scraped against them as she tried to pry his grip loose. Her vision blurred. Her brown eyes widened in panic as she clawed at his wrists, her small frame shaking under his weight. He leaned closer, shouting words she couldn't even process anymore. She gasped, the cold air burning her lungs. 3 gunshots cut through the alley. Her attacker's body collapsed instantly, face down on the ice. Delilah froze, trembling, staring at the blood spreading beneath him. She turned her head slowly toward the shadows. Dante stepped forward, calm and composed, lowering his gun. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a sharp black suit, his gray eyes held nothing. No anger. No relief. Nothing at all. Her chest tightened with a different kind of fear as realization took hold. This man, her employer, had killed someone for her. This was the moment Delilah Morrison understood that the most dangerous man in Chicago had decided she belonged to him, and there was nothing she could do to stop what came next. But how did a shy waitress from Englewood catch the attention of a man who felt nothing for anyone? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for tomorrow's story. Let's begin. Delilah Morrison's life was built on quiet routines and long hours, a kind of existence that kept her steady even when everything around her felt unstable. Every morning started before sunrise. She worked the opening shift at a small coffee shop in Bronzeville, a place where regulars came more for the warmth than the drinks. She remembered every name, every preferred order, every bad joke from customers who came in to feel seen. When her shift ended, she rushed across the city to Valentino's, the Italian restaurant where she waited tables 6 nights a week. Double shifts weren't a choice. They were the only way she kept her life afloat. Her apartment in Pilsen was small, 1 bedroom, thin walls, a heater that rattled loudly every winter, but it was hers. It was the first place that felt even remotely safe after years of instability. She sent money each month to her foster brother Malik, who was trying to stay in trade school despite constant setbacks. Helping him was non-negotiable. In her mind, they had come from the same broken start, and she couldn't stomach the idea of him falling through the cracks the way so many others did. Her past rarely came up in conversation, mostly because she kept it locked away behind the soft smile that people complimented her for. Delilah had lost her mother at 16 to a stray bullet during a neighborhood dispute. One moment she had a home, a routine, a parent who worked too much but tried her best. The next, she was thrust into foster care with strangers who treated kids like burdens. By the time she turned 18, she had learned the safest way to survive was to make herself as quiet and unthreatening as possible. Speak softly. Avoid conflict. Stay polite. Never draw attention. These habits didn't make her weak, they kept her alive. Over the years, those survival techniques became a personality that people found comforting. She checked on elderly neighbors during winter storms. She brought leftover pastries from the coffee shop to the man who slept behind the laundromat. She hugged people who looked like they needed it, even when she didn't have much left to give. Her kindness wasn't a performance. It was the only part of her that the world hadn't managed to crush. Yet the cost of being gentle in a city built on pressure was loneliness. She had acquaintances everywhere, but few true friends. The kind of people who loved loudly or fiercely scared her, because intensity felt like danger. That's why she had gone back to her ex-boyfriend too many times. He had anger problems, jealousy issues, and a temper she never understood. Yet he apologized with tears and begged for chances she knew he didn't deserve. Ending it hadn't been easy. Surviving it was harder. While Delilah fought to remain unnoticed in a crowded world, Dante Salvatore built a life where every step he took was watched, feared, and discussed. At 28, He controlled a criminal network that spread across Chicago with precision. Some people described him as a ghost, a man who appeared in places where trouble followed. Others spoke of him with a caution that hinted at terrible stories they refused to share out loud. No one in his orbit truly understood him. They only knew the consequences of stepping out of line. His rise began 5 years earlier with the Milwaukee Avenue Massacre, a violent event that left several men dead and Dante the new head of the Salvatore organization at only 23. He didn't speak publicly about that day, but everyone understood it reshaped the entire criminal landscape of the city. The message had been clear. He wasn't a man who tolerated betrayal. He wasn't a man who hesitated. His leadership style didn't rely on loud threats or dramatic displays. He preferred silence, strategy, and fast action. His penthouse in the West Loop matched his personality. Minimal, cold, every detail chosen for function rather than comfort. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, a view he took in each night without emotion. Below him was the empire he managed, gambling operations tucked inside Chinatown, distribution routes running through the South Side, connections stretching as far as Gary, Indiana. Every neighborhood, every street corner, every deal moved according to his design. Dante had no interest in romance or companionship. His relationships were transactional, kept short and emotionless. People were assets or obstacles, nothing more. That approach hardened after the night he witnessed his father killed by a lieutenant he trusted deeply. Dante had been 20 at the time, young enough to feel the shock, but old enough to understand the lesson. Loyalty meant nothing if it wasn't backed by fear. Trust was a weakness that could cost him everything. So he chose not to feel much at all. Violence no longer stirred him. Money didn't thrill him. Power was simply the only world he had left to shape. The closest thing he felt to emotion was certainty, the calm that came with knowing no one could blindside him again. Delilah and Dante lived in the same city but moved through entirely different realities. She kept her head down to stay safe. He kept his head high because no one dared challenge him. She built her life on compassion. He built his on discipline. She avoided conflict at all costs. He resolved conflict with precision. They were opposite responses to pain, molded by the trauma they carried. Survival had shaped them, but in drastically different ways. One chose softness because the world had taken too much from her. The other chose control because the world had taught him to expect betrayal. Their paths should never have crossed. Yet they did, colliding in a way that neither of them could escape. The night everything shifted began without warning. It was a cold February evening, close to 2 a.m., when Valentino's sat mostly empty except for the men Dante trusted enough to call in for business. Delilah had worked 16 hours straight, her feet numb, her uniform wrinkled, her hair coming loose from a long day. She had served Dante many times over the months he came to the restaurant, but he never looked at her. Not once. To him, she might as well have been part of the furniture, something that existed to make his night run smoothly. She didn't mind staying invisible. Visibility brought danger, and danger had always followed the wrong people into her life. Tonight felt no different, at least not at first. The restaurant was quiet except for murmured conversations from the private dining room. Delilah carried a tray of empty plates toward the kitchen, moving carefully to avoid making any noise that might irritate the men in suits seated behind Dante. When she pushed the kitchen door open with her hip, something stopped her in her tracks. Through the small window in the swinging door, she saw Vincent Torres gripping another man by the collar in the hallway behind the kitchen. Vincent slammed him against the wall with so much force the man's head snapped back. Vincent's voice was low but sharp, filled with the kind of rage that came from frustration, not chaos. A second later, Vincent punched the man in the ribs, driving him to his knees. Delilah froze. The plates on her tray rattled from her trembling hands, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Her mind went blank, her breath caught at the back of her throat. Every instinct she had built over the years told her to look away, walk away, pretend she saw nothing. But her body didn't respond. Vincent turned his head. His eyes locked directly onto hers through the window. The shift in his expression was instant and dangerous. His hand moved toward the weapon tucked beneath his jacket. Her lungs tightened. Her grip on the tray loosened. The plates tilted, threatening to fall. Delilah opened the door slowly, her voice barely rising above a whisper, trying to reach the part of him that might value mercy. I didn't see anything. I just work here. I don't see nothing. Ever. For a moment, Vincent said nothing. His jaw clenched. His stance changed, as if he was considering the quickest way to silence her without alerting the men in the next room. Before he could take a step, another voice cut through the hallway. Leave her. 2 words. Calm. Not loud, but carrying enough weight to shift the entire atmosphere. Dante stood at the far end of the hallway, hands in his pockets as if he had been watching longer than anyone realized. Vincent tensed, lowering his hand immediately. The man on the floor didn't dare move. Dante's eyes moved to Delilah. It was the first time he actually looked at her, really looked. She expected irritation or suspicion. What she didn't expect was recognition. As if he could see her fear and the way she was fighting to hold herself together, yet also see something steadier beneath it. Something that hadn't broken. She stood with her shoulders drawn in, but she wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. Her breathing was uneven, but she met his gaze. There was dignity there, even through the terror. What's your name? He asked, his tone unreadable. Delilah, she said, swallowing hard. Delilah Morrison. Who drives you home? He asked next. I take the bus. He didn't look pleased with that answer. From now on, Tony takes you. Tony, who had been lingering near the end of the hall, nodded instantly, understanding this wasn't a suggestion. Delilah blinked, unsure what was happening or why Dante was suddenly concerned about her safety. We'll finish here, Dante told his men, dismissing them without taking his eyes off her. He studied her for several long seconds, as if trying to understand something he hadn't noticed before. Let Tony walk you out. Delilah wanted to refuse. She didn't want any part of this world, but her voice didn't come. Exhaustion, shock, and fear kept her silent. Tony guided her outside, opened the car door, and drove her home without saying much beyond polite small talk. Dante stayed in the hallway for several minutes after she left, replaying the moment in his mind. He wasn't confused by the violence. He lived in it. What confused him was her reaction. Most people begged, cried, or tried to negotiate when they stumbled into something they shouldn't see. She had simply wanted to survive without causing trouble for anyone else. No angle. No manipulation. Just fear held together by decency. That's when curiosity took hold, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't desire. It was the need to understand why someone like her existed in a city that punished softness. By the next morning, he made a decision. He wanted information, not because he suspected her, but because he needed to know who she was beneath that quiet exterior. Tony began following her during spare hours. His reports came back quickly. She lived simply. She worked constantly. She didn't go out at night. She attended church twice a month. She sent part of every paycheck to help her foster brother finish school. She never complained about anything. She never caused trouble. Every person who knew her described her the same way, kind, patient, helpful. A life like hers didn't make sense to Dante. People didn't stay good without a reason. Either they were hiding something, or they were playing a role for personal gain. But Tony's reports kept coming back the same. Delilah had no hidden motives. Her goodness wasn't a performance. It was real. And for the first time in years, Dante felt something shift inside him, not emotion but awareness. Awareness of a person whose existence contradicted everything he believed about the world. A lesson formed quietly: authenticity, when it is consistent, has a power even hardened men cannot ignore. Delilah's life began to shift in ways she couldn't explain. It started small, barely noticeable at first. One evening, while waiting for the train home, a man approached her on the empty platform. He moved too close, ignoring her attempts to step away. She clutched the strap of her bag, trying to stay calm as he whispered comments that made her stomach twist. Before she could react, the man's expression changed. His eyes darted over her shoulder, widening with sudden fear. He stepped back so quickly he nearly tripped over the bench behind him. Without a word, he turned and rushed down the stairs, disappearing into the darkness. Delilah looked around, confused. She saw no one. No police. No train worker. No crowd. She chalked it up to him sobering up, or perhaps realizing she wasn't worth the trouble. It wasn't the first time she had brushed off something unsettling simply because she wanted the moment to be over. Another shift came when her landlord suddenly announced that the rent increase planned for March was no longer happening. The conversation was awkward. The landlord wouldn't make eye contact. He simply handed her a revised notice and walked away quickly, muttering about new ownership interests. Delilah felt relieved. An increase would have forced her to take on even more hours, but she couldn't fathom why the decision had changed so abruptly. She assumed it was luck. A small gift from the universe to make up for all the times things had fallen apart. She had no idea that Dante had quietly positioned himself behind each moment. He watched her train platform incident through a security feed tapped by one of his men. He had anticipated the harassment before it escalated and had someone intervene without revealing their presence. The landlord issue was solved with a single visit from one of Dante's associates, a short conversation that made the man rethink his plans immediately. Dante learned her routines the way other men studied blueprints. He memorized the time she left her apartment, the kind of tea she drank at the start of each shift, the gospel songs she listened to while riding the bus. He learned the route she walked to work, the stores she frequented, the people she greeted with warmth. It wasn't enough to know where she was. He wanted to understand her. It confused him, this pull toward someone who had never stepped into his world voluntarily. He tried to silence the feeling, but it grew stronger each day. Curiosity evolved into something sharper, something harder to control. He found himself replaying the memory of her trembling but composed in the hallway. He remembered the quiet strength in her voice when she tried to save herself without begging. He remembered how her eyes held fear but not hatred. His men started noticing the shift in him. They exchanged looks when he asked questions that had nothing to do with business. Questions about her schedule, her safety, whether she ate enough, whether she seemed tired. They were used to a boss who remained untouchable, uninterested in anything outside profit and order. Seeing him focus on a waitress, one with no connections, no influence, no angle, made them uneasy, though none dared say a word. Delilah, meanwhile, began sensing changes she couldn't quite explain. At the restaurant, Dante's eyes lingered longer when she passed. It wasn't romantic or soft. It was focused, heavy, the kind of attention that made her stomach twist in confusion. She tried keeping her head down, hoping he would lose interest in whatever curiosity had sparked that night in the hallway. But the more she avoided looking at him, the more she felt his gaze tracking her movements. Her efforts to remain invisible were starting to fail. The real shift arrived one Sunday morning. Delilah was arranging him books before service at her church in Bronzeville when she felt someone enter the sanctuary behind her. When she turned, her breath caught. Dante stood near the back pew, hands clasped, expression calm. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't move toward her. He simply sat through the entire service without blinking, as if church attendance were part of his weekly routine. The congregation whispered about the sharply dressed stranger who looked like he didn't belong, but no one dared approach him. Delilah avoided his gaze, her hands trembling slightly as she sang. She didn't know whether to be afraid or grateful, confused or angry. She didn't understand what a man like him could want from someone like her. That week, more changes came. Dante quietly bought her apartment building, an act she wouldn't learn about until months later. He had the drug dealers on the first floor removed within 48 hours. Security cameras were installed discreetly. A doorman appeared at the entrance, claiming new management wanted better safety for all tenants. Delilah accepted the improvement with cautious relief, unaware of the force moving everything into place. Days later, while working her shift at the Bronzeville coffee shop, she glanced up and nearly dropped a cup. Dante sat in the corner booth, a cup of black coffee untouched in front of him, watching her work. He stayed for 2 hours, saying nothing. He didn't approach her. He didn't smile. His presence alone filled the room with thick tension. The other customers sensed it but didn't know why. Delilah's fear grew alongside another feeling, one she didn't want to acknowledge. A pull she couldn't name. A part of her that felt protected by his presence, even as another part knew this level of interest wasn't normal. She couldn't decide whether he was saving her or claiming her. The lesson forming in the background was clear. Protection and control often look similar at first. Obsession can disguise itself as care. Without consent, even kindness becomes a cage. The alley looks different this time, less distorted, less drenched in panic, but no less brutal. The cold air hits Delilah's lungs like ice as Dante guides her forward with a light hand at her back. She doesn't want to return, not really, yet her legs move anyway. Dawn creeps over Chicago, faint and colorless, washing the narrow space in a muted haze. The man who attacked her lies motionless, his body twisted, his shirt clinging to a widening stain on the pavement. For a moment, Delilah can't breathe. Footsteps echo. 3 of Dante's men appear without hesitation, working with practiced speed. No shock, no hesitation, just efficiency. One covers the body with a dark sheet. Another pulls gloves from his coat. The third scans the mouth of the alley, making sure no one is watching. Everything happens so quickly that Delilah feels her mind lag behind reality. A hand wraps gently around her arm. "Come," Dante says. She wants to yank away, but her body is trembling too violently. Before she can gather herself, he opens the back door of a black car. One of his men helps her inside, shutting the door with a soft click that feels far too quiet after the violence she just witnessed. The car pulls away almost immediately. Chicago is waking up, street sweepers rolling past Union Station, early commuters clutching coffee cups, a cyclist pedaling hard against the wind. Life moves forward, indifferent to the horror she just left behind. Delilah stares out the window, trying to anchor herself in anything familiar, but nothing feels real. Her voice breaks loose before she can contain it. "You killed him." There's no tremor in Dante's reply. "Yes." Her chest tightens. "You," she swallows hard. "Why?" "He put hands on you." His tone remains steady, as though he's discussing weather. "That's unacceptable." "You don't even know me," she whispers, anger and disbelief shaking through each syllable. "I know enough." The words slam into her. She presses herself against the corner of the seat, needing distance that doesn't exist inside the car. For several minutes, the only sound is the low hum of the engine. Dante doesn't look away from her, not fully, not even when his phone buzzes. His attention sits on her like heat. Unrelenting, unyielding, heavy enough that she has to force herself to keep breathing. By the time the car reaches her neighborhood, her thoughts have tangled into a confused mess of fear, exhaustion, and something she doesn't want to name. She gets out slowly, not trusting her legs. Dante walks her to the door of her building as if escorting someone precious. She keeps her eyes on the ground. "Please, don't follow me." "I'm not leaving you alone," he replies, not harshly but with a certainty that makes her pulse jump. Delilah steps inside and shuts the door. Her heart is pounding as she locks every deadbolt. She spends the rest of the morning shaking on the couch, replaying the alley in her mind. His voice. His hands. The effortless way he ended a life for her. Hours pass before she discovers the next shock, a small stack of envelopes beneath her door. The top one holds a set of new keys and a note in Dante's neat handwriting. "Your building is under new management. You're safe now." Her stomach drops. She rushes outside, barely stopping to grab her coat. The landlord is pacing near the sidewalk, furious, muttering about contracts and impossible offers. Two of Dante's men stand a short distance away, silent and immovable. Delilah feels her skin prickle. He bought the building. She doesn't need anyone to confirm it. Within days, the drug dealers vanish from the block, replaced by uniformed security posted at the entrance. Gifts begin showing up next, expensive things, leather handbags, designer perfume, jewelry she would never wear in her life. She returns all of it with shaking hands. I like simple things, she tells him at the restaurant the next time he appears, watching her from the bar as if she's the only person worth noticing. Later that week, he leaves a different kind of offering, her favorite book, one she'd mentioned only once, and a cup of coffee from the tiny shop she loves on 53rd Street. No note. No explanation. Just quiet understanding. She hates that the gesture softens something in her chest. Fear doesn't vanish, it simply shifts shape. Being near Dante feels like standing too close to a fire. Dangerous, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. Every time his eyes linger on her, she feels that strange tug between terror and gratitude, a dizzying mix that unsettles her. She starts seeing things she didn't notice before. Not just his intimidating presence, but the cracks beneath it. Moments where he hesitates before speaking, or holds her gaze too long, or lowers his voice like he's afraid of frightening her. There's something human hiding under all that steel. Something damaged. Something that reaches for her with quiet urgency. That scares her even more. One night after closing, she finds him waiting outside the restaurant. He stands in the pool of yellow light cast by the street lamp, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders tense. When she approaches, he exhales as though he's been holding his breath for hours. "You shouldn't wait for me," she says softly. "I wanted to make sure you got home safe." She studies him, really studies him. For the first time, she sees the faint tremor in his fingers, the uneasy shift of his weight. Not a cold-blooded kingpin tonight, but a man terrified of losing something he doesn't know how to keep. Her heart pulls in two directions. He is dangerous. He is devoted. He is undeniable. She is caught between instinct and compassion, fear and longing, morality and desire. The question she never imagined asking now lives at the edge of every thought. Is it possible to care for someone capable of such violence? Is it possible to love a man who believes protection is worth any cost? Delilah doesn't know. But the weight of that uncertainty settles deep inside her, changing everything she thought she understood about herself. Connection can be complicated, especially when affection intertwines with danger. Vulnerability can exist even in those who seem impenetrable, and choices become heavier when safety and fear come from the same source. Delilah had turned down Dante's invitations more times than she could count. Some were gentle requests, some were delivered with the quiet certainty of a man unaccustomed to refusal, but she had stood firm every time. Until tonight. She didn't know why she finally agreed. Exhaustion, curiosity, or the strange pull she felt whenever he looked at her with those unreadable eyes. But she found herself stepping into the private elevator that led to his penthouse. The ride was silent, smooth, almost too calm for the storm of nerves churning inside her. When the doors slid open, she took her first breath in the space he called home. The penthouse stretched wide, all open glass and soft lighting, perched above the city like a quiet realm removed from the noise below. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Chicago in stunning detail, from the sharp lines of the Willis Tower to the glow of Michigan Avenue. Lake Michigan glimmered under the night sky, and across the distance, the lights of Navy Pier shimmered in a quiet row. For someone who ruled Chicago's shadows, Dante lived above them in a temple of stillness. She stepped forward carefully, her heels clicking against the polished floors. The air smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. She expected luxury. Power came with its own aesthetic, but she didn't expect warmth. The place felt lived in, not staged. Books stacked neatly near a leather chair, a half-finished glass of wine on a side table, a coat dropped casually across the arm of a sofa. She found him near the windows, his silhouette outlined by the glow of the city. Shoulders slumped, head bowed slightly, hands clasped behind him. It was the first time she had ever seen him without his guard up. He didn't speak when she approached. He didn't turn. He simply stood there, staring at the city he controlled with an iron will, and for the first time, he looked like a man carrying a weight too heavy for any one person. She took a slow breath. "Your place is beautiful." His voice was low. "It's high enough that no one can reach me." When he finally turned, the exhaustion in his eyes startled her. It wasn't physical. Dante wasn't the type to allow himself that luxury. It was something deeper, carved into him by years of choices he couldn't take back. "You're early," he said softly, almost as if surprised she was real. "You invited me," she replied, trying to steady her voice. "I kept saying no. I figured I owed you at least a conversation." Dante studied her with a gaze that felt more like a question than a stare. "Thank you for coming." The table was already set. Not extravagant, just 2 plates, simple food, candles burning low. A far cry from the expensive gifts he had once tried to drown her in. He had tried too hard then. Now he tried differently, quieter, more intentional. They ate for a while in cautious silence. Delilah watched him from across the table. The lines at the corners of his eyes seemed deeper tonight, as though some truth had worn them down over time. She realized he wasn't tired from work. He was tired from living a life that had hardened him too early. She set her fork down. "Can I ask you something?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Do you ever regret it? The life you're in?" The question hung in the air like smoke. For the first time, Dante's gaze wavered. His jaw tightened. His breath slowed. "I didn't choose it," he answered quietly. "I was born into it." She held his eyes. "You choose it every day." The words hit him harder than she expected. His gaze dipped. A crack, brief but unmistakable, opened in the armor he wore like a second skin. "No one speaks to me like that," he murmured. "Not even my closest men." "Maybe that's the problem," Delilah said. He let out a breath, sharp, controlled, but with a hint of something raw beneath it. "I don't know how to be anything else." She didn't soften her expression, but she didn't harden it either. "You could learn." For a moment, Dante didn't move, didn't blink. It was as if her words had struck some buried part of him he had long forgotten existed. A part that wanted something gentler than fear. Something he didn't even know how to name. He sat back, studying her like she was the only mirror that had ever shown him truth instead of power. "You believe that?" he asked. "I believe people can change," she replied. "If they want to." "And you think I want that?" "I think you want to be known," she said. "Not just obeyed." His hands curled slightly against the table, fingers flexing as if the thought itself made him uneasy. A man like Dante lived on control. But connection, real connection, was unfamiliar terrain. He stood abruptly, walking back to the windows. "Delilah, I don't know what I'm doing." She followed slowly, stopping beside him. The city lights reflected across the floor, casting shifting patterns beneath their feet. "You don't have to know," she said. "You just have to try." Dante turned toward her fully. His expression was still guarded, but the hardness had thinned. Beneath it was something bruised, hesitant, almost tender. A version of him no one else in Chicago would ever believe existed. "What develops between us," he said, voice tight, "is not simple." "I know." Her voice stayed steady. "But simplicity isn't what I'm asking for." He swallowed hard. "I can't change what I've done." "I'm not asking you to erase it," she said. "I'm asking you to be honest about who you are." Her eyes didn't turn away. Neither did his. "I see you," she continued. "All of you. The terrible things you've done. The man you are. The man you could be. I see all of it." The vulnerability that flickered across his face was brief but unmistakable. "And you stay," he whispered. "I stay because you're trying," she answered. Because underneath everything, you want to be better. That matters. Something deep inside him shifted, small, fragile, but real. For the first time, Dante didn't look like the feared force that kept Chicago trembling. He looked like a man learning what it meant to be seen. Genuine connection can be a catalyst for change. Love, when grounded in truth, holds up a mirror that reveals the possibility of growth, even in places shadowed by harm. Delilah had just finished a late shift at the coffee shop when she dragged herself up the stairwell of her Pilsen apartment. Her keys jingled softly, her hands trembling from exhaustion rather than fear. She didn't notice the unfamiliar black SUV parked half a block down, or the quiet figures in dark coats studying her window. The Volkov organization had been circling Dante's empire for months. They couldn't touch his money, his territory, or his men. They couldn't push him off a single block without losing twice as many bodies. There was only one place left to strike. Her. Delilah stepped into her apartment, shut the door behind her, and dropped her bag, only for a gloved hand to clamp over her mouth. She barely had time to gasp before a second man yanked her forward. Her legs kicked against the floor, her nails scraping the wall as they dragged her toward the hallway. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. "Quiet," one of them warned in a thick accent. "Your boyfriend made enemies. You pay the price." She shook her head wildly. "He's not." The cloth tightened around her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears as the cold night air hit her face. She was shoved into a van, thrown onto the floor, wrists bound behind her. The ride felt endless. Sharp turns, brakes screeching, men muttering to each other, until the smell of salt water and old machinery told her they were near the port of Chicago. The van doors slammed open. Rough hands dragged her out and into a warehouse colder than the winter wind outside. Metal walls groaned with every shift of the lake breeze. They tied her to a chair in the center of the wide, empty space. A single light bulb hung above her, swinging slightly. Each breath came in short bursts. She wasn't brave. She wasn't strong. She wasn't built for this world. But she was his weakness, and someone had figured it out. Across the city, Dante's phone buzzed once. The moment he saw the message, a photo of Delilah bound and terrified, everything inside him broke open. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. His rage was too deep for sound. For the first time in his adult life, he lost control. "Get the trucks," he said, voice tight. "All of you. Now." Tony stared at him. "Boss, 14 men?" 15, Dante corrected. "I'm coming." His men exchanged glances. Everyone in the room felt the shift. Dante was no longer acting like a leader. He was acting like a man with something to lose. The drive to the port was silent, the kind of silence that felt dangerous. Dante's fingers tapped against his thigh. Every second Delilah was in their hands was another second too long. The moment the truck stopped, he stepped out first. He didn't wait for a plan. He didn't wait for the scout report. He didn't wait for backup. He moved. The warehouse door burst open. Dante stormed ahead of his men, armed but reckless, his fury guiding him more than strategy. The Volkov guards inside never had a chance. He went through the building like a force of nature, fast, efficient, merciless. Each motion precise. Each strike fueled by something personal. His men followed behind, clearing the path he left. By the time the last corridor fell silent, Dante was already rushing toward the center of the warehouse, breath uneven, eyes scanning the shadows. He saw her. Delilah sat trembling beneath the swinging light, her wrists bound, her cheeks wet from tears she hadn't noticed falling. Her breath caught when she saw him, blood splattered across his shirt and hands, jaw clenched so tightly the muscle twitched. "Dante," she whispered. He dropped his weapon instantly. He didn't care about the men behind him. He didn't care about the building. He didn't care about anything except reaching her. His hands shook as he cut the rope, the blade slipping twice before he managed to free her wrists. The moment the ropes fell, she collapsed forward, and he caught her against his chest. His clothes were cold and damp, but his arms were solid, almost crushing her with how tightly he held on. He pressed his forehead to hers, eyes burning. "I told you I'd burn this whole city before I let anyone hurt you." Her breath hitched. The statement should have terrified her. It did, but it was also the clearest truth she had ever heard from him. This was his love language. Violence was the only form of devotion he understood. Her hands rested on his chest, feeling the trembling beneath his calm exterior. She wasn't blind to the wreckage around them. She wasn't naive about what he had done to get to her. But she was alive because he refused to let the world take her. She didn't know how to process that kind of loyalty. As dawn crept across the horizon, they drove back through Chicago. She sat beside him in the front seat of the truck, wrapped in a blanket. Dante kept one hand on the steering wheel and one resting on top of hers, as if letting go would risk losing her again. Delilah stared straight ahead. Her mind played the warehouse over and over. The fear. The violence. The undeniable truth that Dante would destroy anything and anyone if they threatened her. She wasn't sure what scared her more, what he had done, or how her heart reacted to it. He glanced at her, voice low. "If you want distance after this, I'll give it." She shook her head slowly. "No. I choose this. I choose you. But I won't pretend the violence doesn't matter." He nodded once, eyes haunted but grateful. "You don't have to approve of my world," he whispered. "Just don't leave it." Delilah exhaled shakily. "I won't." She couldn't change him. She couldn't erase the blood he carried on his hands. But she could choose how she responded to it, what it meant for her, and what it meant for them. Love in harsh circumstances often takes forms that don't fit traditional rules. Connection in darkness comes with a high price. Acceptance doesn't mean approval, it means understanding reality and choosing how to move through it with open eyes. Delilah's life had shifted entirely. After the warehouse incident, the fragile balance she had tried to maintain between her two jobs and her modest apartment no longer felt possible. The restaurants, the coffee shop, the late-night shifts, all of it now seemed disconnected from the reality that Dante Salvatore had entered her life so forcefully. The decision to leave both jobs came from her own clarity. She could not inhabit two worlds at once. Loving someone like Dante demanded a confrontation with truths she had always skirted, and hiding behind the routines of her previous life felt impossible. She felt some of her innocence slip away, a recognition that love for a man like him came with shadows she could not ignore. Yet, despite the darkness surrounding him, Delilah fought to keep the essence of who she was intact. She returned to the Bronzeville church, dedicating time to youth programs, mentoring teenagers who faced obstacles similar to the ones she had overcome. It was in these moments, guiding them with patience and care, that she held onto her identity. Dante's men, silent and watchful, ensured her safety without interfering. The unspoken agreement between them allowed her to live her life as fully as possible, while still being tied to someone whose presence reshaped her existence. Dante, meanwhile, did not change entirely. He continued to run his empire with precision, enforcing the rules that maintained his power. Yet there was a noticeable shift. His decisions became more measured, his acts of violence purposeful rather than reflexive. Civilians were no longer collateral. Members of his organization who wanted out were offered escape routes. Underneath the facade of his control, small gestures, anonymous contributions to rehabilitation programs in Englewood and Bronzeville, reflected the influence of Delilah's consistent goodness. A single person, living honestly, had begun to create ripples in a world built on fear and strategy. Their relationship had no simple structure, no predictable path. Dante's fierce possessiveness remained, but now it was tempered by the recognition of Delilah as his anchor, the one person who could reach him in ways no one else could. She accepted the complete truth of him, his violence, his power, his moments of tenderness. Loving him did not mean condoning his actions, but understanding the full scope of who he was. Negotiating between darkness and light became their shared reality, a continuous adjustment that demanded honesty, resilience, and courage. Through it all, The core lesson remained clear: transformation is rarely complete, and change is incremental. Delilah maintained her values despite the circumstances, and Dante, influenced by her presence, became a version of himself capable of restraint and selective care. Together, they created a life in the shadows, defined not by clean resolutions, but by a commitment to protect, respect, and acknowledge each other fully. Even in moral gray areas, the presence of one good person had the power to shape outcomes, proving that influence and integrity endure, no matter the surrounding chaos. Sunday mornings became Delilah's sanctuary. She moved through the Bronzeville church with quiet purpose, organizing youth programs, tutoring, and offering guidance to teenagers navigating the same streets she had grown up on. Her presence was warm, attentive, and unwavering, and the children responded with trust. Outside, discreet black SUVs and sleek cars remained parked at a distance, Dante's men maintaining a careful perimeter. He never intruded, but his shadow of protection was always present, a silent acknowledgement of the line between care and control. Evenings found her returning to the West Loop penthouse. Dante waited, often by the windows overlooking the city. When she entered, a subtle change in him was unmistakable. The rigidness around his eyes softened, his posture less tense. For all his power and calculated nature, her arrival melted the edges of his icy composure. There were no tidy resolutions between them, no simplistic answers to the tension that existed in their lives. Two souls intertwined in complexity, each aware that their connection existed in a world shaped by extremes, yet still finding space for moments of humanity. Delilah's consistent goodness had effects that extended beyond her own life. Within Dante's organization, men noticed subtle shifts, decisions measured more deliberately, acts of aggression becoming strategic rather than impulsive. Through shell corporations, Dante quietly funded programs in Englewood and Bronzeville, creating avenues for people to escape the cycles he himself had perpetuated. The influence of one person's integrity, her insistence on kindness, created ripples that reached farther than either of them could see. Several lessons emerged from the path they had traveled together. The first was the value of invisibility as a survival strategy. For marginalized individuals navigating dangerous circumstances, learning to observe, adapt, and remain discreet is not weakness, it is strategy. Power, when wielded without empathy, isolates and dehumanizes, leaving rulers disconnected from the very people their actions affect. Yet authentic goodness, Delilah's unwavering integrity, has a magnetic quality that can crack even the hardest defenses. Protection and control can appear similar, yet the distinction lies in consent and agency. Dante's early fixation blurred the lines, teaching that love and care require boundaries to prevent domination from masquerading as concern. Vulnerability, the willingness to be fully seen, can penetrate walls built over a lifetime of mistrust, revealing hidden truths that authority or fear cannot reach. Love's complexity became undeniable. It did not erase danger, wrongdoing, or moral compromise, but it transformed the context in which choices were made, offering clarity and insight into human character. Choosing goodness came with costs. Delilah's integrity demanded sacrifice and courage, but it also defined her essence. Maintaining one's values while navigating morally ambiguous spaces reinforced the principle that human character is not solely shaped by circumstance, but by deliberate action. Living in gray areas required constant awareness, accepting reality without surrendering the self. They both learned that a single person's consistent ethical choices can influence even the most hardened environments, producing change that extends beyond immediate perception. Reflections on their story highlight the broader truth. This is not a glorification of criminal life or toxic dynamics. It is an exploration of human complexity, connection, and resilience in extreme circumstances. Delilah's presence within Dante's world demonstrated how sustaining humanity in inhumane settings can generate profound effects. Her steady kindness challenged the rules of the city he controlled, showing that even one person can create meaningful change by staying true to their core values. The simple act of seeing and being seen fully, without pretense or hidden agendas, has consequences far beyond what might appear visible. The closing thought is one of enduring clarity. the power of maintaining core goodness cannot be underestimated. Even in darkness, especially when surrounded by violence and fear, kindness remains essential. Small, consistent acts of genuine humanity create ripples that extend far beyond immediate circles, influencing individuals, organizations, and communities in ways that often remain unseen. Every choice matters, and every moment offers the potential to define who we are and who we aspire to become. This story reminds us that even in the darkest spaces, human connection and authentic goodness continue to matter. Delilah and Dante's relationship, layered with complexity, danger, and moments of tenderness, exemplifies the transformative power of integrity, vulnerability, and deliberate action. If this story resonated, hit subscribe and share in the comments where you're watching from. Your engagement ensures these stories reach more people, fostering discussion and reflection on the enduring impact of character and morality. Tomorrow, another story will arrive, bringing new insight and inspiration. Thank you for joining this community of thoughtful, engaged viewers.